210. Hey guys, it's Natasha with Nothing New 210 Podcast. Thank you to Vodpod Media for housing and producing, and to Latina Podcast Network for having me on your network. Guys, if you're listening, go watch. And if you're watching, go listen. Either way, go like and subscribe on YouTube and follow me and follow who I have. Again, you're going to want to see who I have. This is going to be a very good episode. So tune in, grab your popcorn and your snacks or whatever, because it's about to get real. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Chris Navarro. I'm the Director of School and Community Programs at the DoSeum.
Awesome. Okay, so you are here to talk about a few things, but one most important thing is something up and coming.
Our exhibit, Uniquely Us,
Yes.
Understanding Race and Building Unity. And so this is an exhibit that will be in its second run. So it's gone through a long development process. The design started back in 2020. And we're excited to have received some grant to support the exhibit and programming around it.
Yeah, and not just any grant.
That's right. Right. And so the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences, the IMLS, were awarded a grant from them for the actual fabrication of the exhibit. So the process is we designed this exhibit from 2020 to 2022. It had its first run at the DoSeum, and during that time, of course, we studied reactions to it. It's a design process, and so we're really assessing like how effective the exhibit was at getting to the goals that we intended.
Yeah.
And so the grant is now supporting the enhanced design of the exhibit.
Okay.
And so we're proud to have received the grant. We'll open the exhibit in February, and it will run throughout the spring.
Yeah.
And then the Smithsonian and their Reckoning with Our Racial Past initiative, which a branch program of that is the National Conversation on Race, invited the DoSeum to apply for a grant for support of programming around that exhibit. And we were awarded that and have started kicking off the program this fall. The National Conversation on Race, by the way, is happening right now in San Antonio. There's several other partner organizations along with the DoSeum that are producing some great events relative to their organizations.
I love that. Now, for some people that may not know, the DoSeum is geared towards children.
That's right. Yeah.
So why a children's museum, and what was the development process like? A topic like this, which is a huge topic, and how was that geared towards children?
Great question. Yeah. We are the STEM Center for Children in San Antonio, formerly the San Antonio Children's Museum, located down on Houston Street. We grew in 2015 into the DoSeum. It was an expansion of the facility, and really a sort of redevelopment of our approach to education. And through that, we've taken on some fairly hefty topics in the academic sense in regards to STEM and STEAM education. In 2020, our VP of exhibits at the time was compelled by the killing of George Floyd, by the protests that ensued, by the ugliness that we all witnessed, to wonder or pitch to our team whether we should do an exhibit focused on those issues and create it in the way that the DoSeum creates learning experiences for kids, which is to build on their natural experience of play and curiosity,
right,
and channel that into a safe space for adults in their lives to be able to have conversations around these challenging topics. I'll say for myself, it was an easy yes.
Yes.
I have two kids. My son at the time was 8 years old, and we jumped into a conversation that year that, in all honesty, it was bracing myself to have maybe in the future about interactions with police. And it was really jarring to have an 8-year-old child wonder, what's wrong with the police? Why are the police hurting people? And just to experience fear, from a child's perspective about what was happening in the world. And so we were already having to have conversations around those issues in my own household with the age group of child that is the target age for the DoSeum.
Right.
I, of course, was not the only one on our team to have had similar experiences. And we in our due diligence to the community that we serve, also surveyed members, guests, current guests at the time, community stakeholders, partners, to get a sense of whether our thinking was right and whether this really was a resource that was needed. And overwhelming response was yes, that adults could envision there being a safe place that kids could interact in the natural way that they play and learn that could lead to some of the difficult conversations around race and unity.
And I love that because it's true. I mean, I have an elementary, middle school, and a high schooler, right? Very different levels of, just where they are in general in life. And so how do you answer some of these really hard questions or address some of these, we shouldn't have to address these topics, but it is what it is right now. And so how do we begin to do that? So I love that. Now, what was that design process like?
I'm going to say it was not one of the most intense design process that I have ever been a part of because of the focus topics. Lateral to that, we had just created a DEAI committee. We say the diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. This was in the works over a couple of years before 2020. The development into the DoSeum, there was always a focus on inclusion and increasing access, acknowledging the cultural diversity, kind of reflecting on what the downtown location had been like, and just acknowledging that we wanted to be sure that the place was welcoming to all families in San Antonio. So it was always like this process of reflecting on who is coming to the DoSeum. We want for the demographics of the DoSeum to be reflective of the city. So what do we need to do to be out in the city to be sure that all families see this as a place that belongs to them? Because of that, eventually there was this need to have a committee focused on diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, even though we understood that all of us are thinking intentionally about it to ensure that representatives from our different departments were thinking about what each department could do. It seemed, an important next step in the development of the DoSeum. So that was happening at the same time that our exhibit VP was inspired to have this pitch. And so the first thing that we needed to do is establish a safe place for our own team and the partners that we welcomed in to have these conversations. And that's where that connection back to the work we had done with the DEAI committee was important. So what it resulted in was the drafting of an inclusion statement that is still the inclusion statement that the DoSeum stands by. You can find it on our website.
Okay.
But what it helped us to do was sort of set norms, normalize what we considered to be a safe space and what we expected from each other to maintain the safety in that space. And then going into the design process, there was sort of the reality that we all had to understand that we would be talking about subjects that probably would be triggering emotionally, and that we needed to acknowledge that and allow for those reactions to be part of the conversation. That we needed to be clear about setting boundaries about what we could or couldn't talk about. That maybe unlike other design tasks that we've had, if any of the designers on the team or stakeholders felt like they needed to step away from the process, that needed to be allowed. So it was a really sensitive process to all of the designers. And it's a community-centered process as well. And that's always been a part of how we do things at the DoSeum. So even from the move from downtown, we've reached out to the community to have conversations with them, to inform our ideas, to ask us the hard questions, to pressure check our thinking, and to actually prototype and test out the things that we want to do with children.
That's amazing. The fact that so much thought and effort has gone into it, and with the consideration of the community and its members and the diversity of San Antonio, I mean, we truly are a melting pot. So to be able to incorporate, I don't want to say accommodate, but incorporate and think of and consider each nationality or religion or whatever it is into the DoSeum is amazing.
It's an increasingly diverse city. I
Yes.
think we've always been diverse, right? And we know sort of the history of diversity here and the challenges around that and the hard history here. But the city has only grown in its diversity, and we know that there's communities throughout the late 20th century and, in the last few decades that are new to the city but have started to embed themselves and ingrain themselves in the culture. The DoSeum is there for all children. So, of course, with this exhibit, but at all times, that is our responsibility and our challenge, too, to ensure that we reflect on who is visiting the DoSeum and do the work that we need to be sure everyone makes it a place for their family.
Now, I think another question, just me as a parent, and I'm sure people might have the question too, is there anything that could potentially be offensive? And is that something that you guys considered?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, it was really like defining the terms, right? We kind of throw around the word race a lot. And, not everyone necessarily stops to even kind of look up the word or think about what do I think that means and, unpack all of the possible meanings around it. So it's a really important part of the design process to take all of these potential terms and think about not only the terminology, but then what particular activities and content that led to, and ask ourselves what potentially offensive things might happen in those contexts. I think what was interesting to find was that you can tell this story about the challenges of racism in our history and in our culture. You can talk about the science around race and the reality of it being a social construct and still be sensitive to people's emotions around it and to their own life experiences. I feel like we were able to land on activities that are to the point and are clear to the adults what it is that we are inspiring them to talk about with their children.
Yeah.
But they're not so sort of directly in your face that you feel like it's not a safe place that you can be. That was really the balance that we were trying to strike, is that this needs to be a safe place for any family, regardless of their race. So a lot of thought went into every single activity, to the language of the text, to curating the objects that are in the spaces.
Right. And a lot of what's at the DoSeum is also interactive. It's not just reading, right? Like a typical museum. So how do you make that topic interactive?
Absolutely, yeah. So that is always the challenge for us. It is interactive play through learning through play. The most natural and organic way that kids allow their curiosity to become creativity and critical thinking. And so we took cues from the kind of STEM and STEAM activities that we typically do, but kind of figured out how do we layer this on these challenging topics. We also took inspiration from active research in this area. So researchers back in the 1930s focused on the selection of dolls by children, right? And so it was a family of researchers that were Black and had noticed that their own children, in their selection of toys, were making decisions that were surprising to them. So they conducted studies to see what attitudes kids had about dolls. And so, really young children that pretend to play with dolls. And the disturbing thing that they found was that children of all colors were selecting the white dolls and qualifying it because those were the better dolls, and that there was something wrong with the dolls that were representative of Black people or brown people. Original studies focused particularly on Black and white people. So we took a cue from that study, and what we're inviting families to do is to watch how their children play. So we recreated the environment of the study by having a selection of dolls that have different skin tones and could be representative of different races and different ethnicities. We're not directing the families to do anything but allow their children to play in the environment. But the material is there for the adults to read and understand that this is based on this doll study. The Clarks were the researchers back in the 1930s that originally did this. And what we hope is that the adults will spend a bit more time, not only in this moment paying attention to how their children select toys, but in every moment that they're playing, because it really says a lot about the values that their child is inheriting, not only from them, but from the other influences in the world that sometimes are out of your control.
Absolutely.
So that's one way that we're not reframing what a child does in regards to playing in the museum, but we're equipping the parent with the knowledge that they can take not only in that experience, but away from the museum to pay closer attention to the influences that their child might have.
Definitely. Now, just because I'm aware of history and an adult, right? How far of a timeline are you going back? Are you, and what does that look like? Are you guys hitting on some of the heavier topics?
We are, and that's a great question. So the framework, because we are a STEM center for kids, yet rooted in play, is to really combine that experience of organic play, but we have loaded with a lot of information in science and are touching on history and some of the more difficult aspects of history, so like the doll study. Another way that we're taking an approach that we typically use at the DoSeum, but spinning it into this topic, is to take gamification and the design of building cities. So one of the staple exhibits and programs at the DoSeum is to equip kids to be engineers, architects, civil engineers, civic voices, right? To own that they have a say in what the future of their city is going to look like.
Right.
We've been doing that work since before we moved from downtown, working with UTSA School of Architecture, the American Association for Architecture, if I remember correctly, or American Institute for Architecture, and then local civil engineers who kind of informed what that process could look like. So we have this sort of gamified process to take kids through the steps of designing a city. And we've been able to use that to focus on different aspects of what it takes to work together to build up a community. A version of that centers on values, right? And so we've got values that kids can choose from, but then if they're gonna work with the other citizens in their neighborhood to build up a project, they've got to come to some alignment in their value system to decide what the project is going to be. We're seeing this play out right now with some of the big projects that are being planned for downtown.
Right.
And in our city build activities, we see kids have the exact same types of conversations that adults have about where people need to be able to live and where they work and how that all needs to work together through this gamified model build using toys and kind of game cards and just that logic of you've got this amount of time and this, we're trying to get a task done together. For this exhibit, we focused on the history of segregation in the United States going all the way back to indigenous people. The first version of this game was a board game style. That was one of the learning pieces, frankly, from the first iteration of the exhibit. Would love to see more kids instinctively play board games.
Right.
That's not their cultural context right now. So it was really difficult for the kids and families to truly engage in the game the way that it was supposed to be played when it was laid out in that fashion. So that is transformed into a video game now that's on screens. I know we kind of struggle with the right amount of screen time for kids.
Right.
But the idea here is we're meeting them where they are with the application. So it's something that's super intuitive to them playing a screen game. This version of the City Build game will have a video story that shows indigenous people on the land, working the land, and then a colonial ship coming with slaves and taking over parts of the land and pushing indigenous people away.
Wow.
And building up the land with the slaves. But then war happening and the slaves being freed, but then not having the rich portion of the land that had been built up and having another area to work. And the portion that had been built up by the slaves and was the original land that the indigenous people worked begins to develop. And then we see sort of the industrial layering of city over those populations of people. And then we see roads, land, and we see the redlining happen where historic neighborhoods or historic populations of people turn into neighborhoods because that's where they had been located through this hard history of conflict and segregation and separation.
Right.
Then the game starts. And that's a quick video that sort of sets you up. And
Wow.
I've learned gaming terminology from my own kiddo. I'm not an old school gamer, so this is some of the learning for me. But we'll say that they spawn into this city, right? And so your players now are in this city that has had this history, and you have your environment. Each of the environments looks like the interior of a house, but you can see some differences in the quality of the households. There are resources for the whole city to choose from. The neighborhood that has the highest quality appearance of their house gets to choose 16 resources, and they get to go first. The next neighborhood that has a little bit kind of lesser quality gets to choose 8 resources, and they go second. The next neighborhood, again, a little bit less in their household, we're maybe looking at a working class population, if you will, gets to choose 4 resources, and they go next. And then the last ones to choose are those that are struggling the most. They get 2 resources, and they're the last to choose out of the full bank of resources. So by that time, pretty much everything has been chosen, and whatever's left is what they get. And then the game begins, and it kind of runs like a Sims game, right? So you've got kids in your household, and the first thing is that they're hungry. So then you go to your resource inventory, and hopefully you've got a way to feed them. And there's some variety about those choices, but hopefully you have them. If you don't, the community score begins to drop. So that the way the game is won is the community has a score that has to be achieved with all of the neighborhoods doing something in order to contribute to that. If one neighborhood is lacking a resource and those kids are starving, the city score goes down. Then it's up to the players to decide what can be done to solve the problem. 2 ways to win the game. Someone with more resources could decide to share resources out. The game does not instruct you to do that. You have to decide that you want to try to do it. If you slide a resource over to someone else's neighborhood, it will be accepted, and they can then have the resource that they might be missing. If you happened to pick education as a resource, no matter which neighborhood you are in, if you go to activate education, it will open up 5 other resources for you. So then you might have some sustainability with a particular challenge at hand. There's 2 challenges that the kids ask for. They're hungry, and then they have homework to do, but it's online. So they need to get on their Wi-Fi to be able to do it. And the game runs for a very limited amount of time. All of this happens at the speed that you would expect for a screen game for kids.
Okay.
And they hopefully make the right choices. If they don't, the community score goes down, and the city perishes. We'll say nothing too drastic on the visuals to your question about whether anybody could be offended. The look of it is like a video game, right? So it still has that kind of that playful aspect to it, but enough of the seriousness of the issues in history that we, again, would like to spark the conversation.
Right.
I'll say a really edifying moment for me in playing the board game version at the opening year of the exhibit with my own kids and my father was it opened up the opportunity for him to talk about the town that he grew up in and the segregation that was the reality of his life.
Yeah.
And that just because he wanted to explain that this game really reflects the reality of, that some people go through. And I lived in this neighborhood where we didn't have anything, and we had to kind of figure out how to make things work. And there was definitely these other neighborhoods, right, where they had more, and that was a part of his life story that he was able to tell as a part of the experience of playing the game. And those are the kinds of things that we hope come out of these moments, is that conversations are struck that they might not have had otherwise.
Right. And I love that. So many things that you talked about that I was kind of hoping you guys would touch on, which is, redlining for one, which happened here in San Antonio.
Absolutely.
And is still going on. Not just, food deserts, but health disparities, lack of resources to healthcare. And that was one of my doctoral projects was, SDOH. And so, social determinants of health. So why aren't people getting or seeking the healthcare that they need? And either they aren't aware that it's there are no resources. But you look at the north side of town that has, you throw a rock, you hit a clinic.
Resources are plentiful and variety of places to get food, right? That
even the food that's in the
variety
HEBs, groceries.
within a store.
Yes,
Absolutely.
you walk in, a display on the north side is going to look different than a display on the south side, and it just is, and it's not great.
Right.
So I think it's very important to talk about. And to start that conversation with our kids.
I think one of the most satisfying parts of this whole process is that we test these things out with kids, and so much of the time they're so much farther ahead of us as adults in getting to the solution.
Right.
The first time that we tested the city game with a mixed audience of kids. The first group to win the game were the youngest kids in the room. I think they were like 3 and 4 year old set of boys that immediately noticed, like, wait, you don't have all the things you need. Let's just share all of the resources, and that was it. And they were done, and everybody got what they needed right away.
That's how the world worked. Things would be so much better.
There was one of the we tested at Opportunity Home. We have a great partnership with the Opportunity Home sites. We wanted for families, of different income levels to play the game too. Kind of to your question too about what might be triggering, right? That was great. Affirmation. We've heard so many times in the Opportunity Home testing rounds that they were sort of glad that we were having this game played so that other people could see what living situations were like for all families in San Antonio that might not have to struggle the way that they do.
Yes.
There's a girl at Opportunity Home that was the first in, a year of playing the testing the game, more or less, that was the first person to ask, do I have to take all 16 resources? So she got, neighborhood number 1. She had her choice of whatever you want of the 16.
Yeah.
She chose 8 and was like, I kind of have everything I need. I'd rather just leave everything available. And we allowed that to happen in that play. But again, just sort of getting to the perspective that children have that's unaffected by some of the unfortunate things that we have to go through as we become adults, or maybe don't have to go through, but it's the reality.
Right.
And they sort of have a more pure view of what's just and fair.
Yeah. It's morals and values but also without having gone through life and some of, I think when people gain that scarcity mentality, it's either how they were raised or, they're a product of their environment, or just what they're taught later on in life. And so it's kind of crappy that you're right. I mean, that one girl recognized, I have everything I need. I don't need all of these.
I think the funny thing was, the 3 of us adults that were facilitating and observing just looked at each other and the smile on our face, like, none of us ever asked the question, right? Like, this is brilliant that she asked.
Yeah. I love that. Now, I know you said you go back to racism. Is that going as far back to, even like the KKK and
so the most distinct things that we hit on historically would be like the doll study, right? And calling out that the doll study was a thing that happened. Yeah. Which, by the way, we connected with a researcher, a current researcher at a university that recreated the doll study within the last 5 years, I think. And unfortunately, the findings were the same. But the recreation was updating like the variety of toys and, let's see what kids do now. But she was seeing some of the same sort of stereotyping from different kids about toys that represented people of color. It was very telling, I think, about sort of how much work has yet to be done. The city game, without necessarily explicitly calling out that these are indigenous Americans, but we are very much, we're grounded in our locality here in Texas, here in the United States. That is the implication. But again, to your question, we're not explicitly saying, that it's a specific tribe, that these are the Spanish coming, right? Right. But that is, of course, what we want to indicate. And then that's up to the adults, the teachers, the caregivers that are there with the kids to spark that conversation and then flesh out, more of the detailed information. Yeah. The closest that we would get to your question is a resource library section that's part of the exhibit. Okay. And so there you could find more detailed stories in history about these issues. That has also been curated. They are family-friendly books. They're books for kids 11 and under. Okay. And so, of course, we're trusting, the quality of the books that we've reviewed would be appealing to families and, presenting the history in a way that's right for kids and for families to have. Yeah. And then 3 parts of the exhibit. In the original exhibit, we had a wall of heroes and sheroes. We were super excited about just sharing a lot of stories. We found that it was maybe overwhelming to have so many stories. So in this version, we decided to focus on 3 stories. Okay. And the presentation for storytelling at the DoSeum to have a play aspect will be the children walking on a treadmill with a video screen. So then as they walk, the story advances. And so in order to advance the story, you've got to walk. And the walk is symbolic. Okay. So one of the focus personages is Emma Tenayuca, our own Emma Tenayuca here from San Antonio, workers' rights activist back in the 1930s. So we're proud to have Carmen Tafoya's book, That's Not Fair, as the book that is being read to the kids, is being presented to them on the screen.
Wow.
The book is presented as a story of a walk that Emma takes with her grandfather around the city of San Antonio. And as she's walking, she's noticing the way that her neighborhood looks, the way that other neighborhoods look, the way that the pecan factory where her family works looks, the way that the department stores look downtown, and the way that the people are dressed when they're going to work, and begins asking these questions. And through the story, she discovers that things are not fair in her city, and inspired to do something about that. And of course, the reality is that she organized pecan shellers at the factories to strike and get better working conditions for themselves. And that story is beautifully told by Carmen Tafoya. And so to your question about specific historic stories, we focused on heroes, really, and sheroes, right?
Okay.
And so instead of maybe some of the kind of the darker things, let's look at how people took those situations and turned them around.
Got it.
The other personage is Ruby Bridges, and her story about the desegregation of school and that first march up to the school steps and into the classroom. And Redbird, or Zitkala Se, who is an indigenous woman that I learned this term through the work with the teachers in this project, is a cultural broker. And so she was one of the kids that was forced to go to a mission school, but she really enjoyed the learning. And so what was interesting about her story is that she embraced the learning that she got about Western culture, but she didn't lose her connections to her native culture. And she became someone who wanted to help European people understand indigenous people and their civilization and the beauty of their culture and their language better.
Yeah.
But for indigenous people to understand that there was some beauty and civilization in the people that had come to their land. And so she, it was just an amazing story of kind of living in both of those worlds.
Yeah.
And again, sort of the symbolism of the walks that Native Americans had to take because they were pushed out of their original lands and onto reservations in other areas of the country.
Yeah.
And so that walk on the treadmill is, the kid-friendly fun that we do at the DoSeum, but it does represent the walk for civil rights that, people like Ruby Bridges and her family did during the civil rights movement, the marches, the walks that the indigenous people were forced to take, but did proudly and maintained their culture. And
That's beautiful. I love how you guys have shown, like you said, how do you take something bad and try to make it good?
That's it.
Because that's also a huge part of history. There are a ton of bad things, but there also, are activists and change that has been made. Is there a lot of change that needs to continue to be made? Yes.
We've had change makers in history, and we want to empower them.
Yes.
The follow-up to that activity is called What Do You Do? And it puts kids in a kind of finish your own story adventure.
Okay.
Right? And so they see 3 stories inspired by the stories that they just heard about from those historic personages, and their chance to decide what they would do in a tough situation when forced to maybe think about their hair or the color of their skin or their ethnicity or race.
That's amazing. So where is it going to be? I'm pretty familiar with the DoSeum layout.
Yeah.
So where's it going to be?
Yeah, so our special exhibits gallery, that is when you go into the DoSeum, if you go all the way to the last building, the very last gallery. Okay. Right now we have our train display. The DoSeum Railroad is in there for the winter months. And we've got some artists that have built some amazing environments for the DoSeum Express. But that is our flexible gallery, and where we have visiting exhibits and where we, of course, install our own designs.
Awesome. Now, you said that this exhibit will actually be traveling.
That's the intent. So with the IMLS grant, we were able to elevate the fabrication of it. Again, like that example of moving from a board game to a video game and having coders build this game full with graphics and really nice aesthetics to the displays. Yes, then the intent is for it to travel around the country.
Awesome. Honestly, I would love to play that board game with my kids.
It's when we're testing it, it results in some great intense conversations and I mean, and it's interesting because I think that's the balance that we try to strike. There's still fun to be had, right? Like you're still playing a game, but then understanding that you really are talking about some serious things and maybe learning some things about history that you didn't know.
Is there a potential that would be out somewhere in the future?
So thanks for asking. It's the second time that somebody has asked. Some of the teachers that we were training wondered, like, where did y'all get the game? And then we explained that we designed it and they wondered about having it. As part of the exhibit, there'll be a resource guide that travels with it. The teachers that are in the training, thanks to the grant, will help us to refine that resource guide. And we will pack into the resource guide more than likely a version of the game that could be recreated. So for educators that might want to play the game in a classroom, or a community educator that might want to do it in a community center context.
Nice.
I'm envisioning maybe sort of like PDFs of the pieces that you could run off and then be able to play the board game version of it.
Got it.
Which what we had to do when we narrowed it to the screen game was come up with the two situations. The original version had a deck of cards, and there was, I believe we had about 10 or 15 situations that you could, this is happening. So now what do you do? How does your city deal with this crisis or this emergency?
Yeah. Honestly, I would love to play. I mean, I don't have access to, some of those teacher resources, but even as a parent, I mean,
love to hear that. We love the ideas.
Yeah.
We're always welcoming these suggestions, and we've not really entered into where we're kind of marketing products and creating things for families and kids. Most of that kind of work is more the outreach and the resources for schools. But love that you asked, and we'll certainly take that back to the team.
Definitely, and I know I'm not the only one, because also as a parent, it's hard. At what point do you bring up these conversations, like, hey, Pastor Macaroni, by the way, do you know about redlining? You know what I mean? How do you start these conversations?
That's right.
And also in a way that they're going to understand it.
If you take a cue even from, something like Trivial Pursuit, right? Where it's just like, we're just talking about things, but then if a topic comes up and it sparks, that kind of socialization around play is something that is the wheelhouse of the DoSeum. So we hope that we inspire that in the exhibit, and I love that you're asking that.
Yeah. DoSeum. I need the game. Thank you. I want to, on the way out, purchase the game. Thank you. Or you can give it to me. It's fine. No. So you guys, I love the DoSeum for several reasons. But what are some other things that you do that are inclusive and accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So kind of going back to the Smithsonian grant, we just had one of our events sponsored through the Smithsonian grant last night. But we do this quarterly. It's called Beyond Limits. So that's our sensory-friendly programming. We've been doing that since we opened the DoSeum. And the idea there is that we reduce the capacity, only 450 people allowed to register, which if you've ever been to the DoSeum, you know that that's not a lot of people in that building. So it feels nice and open. You're not overstimulated by the crowd. We've gotten consultation from experts in special education field, different community organizations and educators that have helped us to make some modifications and place signage in the DoSeum to help families that might need that.
Yeah.
And the idea there is that anyone that would benefit from a sensory-friendly environment, whether it's the adult in the family or the child, is welcome. With this project, we were able to build on some learning that we've done over the years, addressing the lack of access to special education resources, particularly in communities of color. Three things that came out of the Smithsonian grant. They sponsored last night's Beyond Limits, so we were able to provide free access. So it was free admission.
That's awesome.
Ticket price is usually really low for that event. We want families to be able to access it. It was great to be able to do a free admission night. We produced a resource guide that features our resources, Manifest Academy, the Morgan Mac, and Vibrant Works, and more information about their resources. We handed that out last night. We've got more copies. We will be distributing that through our outreach programming, and particularly looking for areas of the city that are underserved with communities of color in mind, to make sure that they understand the resources available in their city.
Yes.
If they have children that are struggling in school, that are struggling, in environments, and they can see that the child is struggling, but they need access to the resources.
Yeah.
And then we were able to purchase a Braille printer 2 devices that will allow us to transform children's books into Braille books.
I love that.
And our own signage at the DoSeum, just to have more access or Braille as an access point. And also create relief maps. So somebody that is sight impaired could have not only the Braille text, but the map of the DoSeum and other ways that can be used to engage kids. And in coloring, and a sight impaired kid could have sort of the experience of coloring something using the relief page. We've been learning all of this from our consultants at Vibrant Works, that helped us to understand how we could help them to be a resource, really. So we'll be providing access to the Braille printer to partners in the city.
Wow.
So we'll, of course, be using it for our own modifications, but our school partners, community partners interested in having more Braille resources will have times throughout the year that we'll do printing on their behalf. So sign up, please, is the idea. We'll have it on display. Last night we had a QR code for people to begin to sign up.
Okay.
Right now, if you're interested, you can reach out to our outreach team. We can start figuring out how to connect people with that service.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Truly amazing and definitely needed. Do you guys have sensory rooms located within the DoSeum?
We do. Thanks for asking that too. That really came out of the sensory-friendly programming nights. Now the brand of that is Beyond Limits. Again, been doing it since opening year. One resource room was transformed into a calm down area for every sensory friendly night. And then we also noticed, as you do in the museum field, we're looking at our spaces, we're looking at exhibits all the time to see if they stay effective and, the joyful learning is happening there. So that resource room was never really used that effectively for anything else besides the calm down nights. And so then at a point it was suggested, why don't we make that a permanent calm down area? And so now that is how that room functions.
Nice.
Lighting is low, there's carpeting, there's soft places to sit, there's fidget toys. It's designed as an area that a family can use if they need to get away from kind of the excitement of the DoSeum.
Right. Yeah. It is exciting. It's an excilding museum.
Thank you.
But I could see how things could just become overload.
It can
for some, and not just for children with ASD. You had mentioned potentially veterans, right, that are hypervigilant, don't want to be in a giant crowd. Also, people potentially with social anxiety, who want to be able to enjoy things without, again, being surrounded by a lot of people.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a more friendly environment for those that. On a regular DoSeum day, it just might not be the best day for them. So,
right. Yeah. Which even then, honestly, go to the museum during the day if you can. It's usually less busy. Of course, not during spring break and holiday season, but
that's our peak times. Spring break. If you come during spring break, be ready to have a lot of people around you, and
for sure.
But yeah, absolutely. I think people kind of know the times to self-select when it's busier or not. Sure. Yeah. And we know that there's families that continue to come back to these nights because it's the perfect setting for them.
Yeah. And there are also adult nights.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I've been to those as
awesome.
Well. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's one of our primary fundraisers. And, I think from the very first opening year of the DoSeum, adults were consistently asking, can adults just kind of come to visit? Which we do have some security measures. So, if an adult wants to just kind of come and see the DoSeum, they're welcome to. But the adult nights are adults only. And in that way, we kind of open up the DoSeum for all adults to come in, have fun. We get community partners to come in, have some great food and sometimes performers. And it's sort of like be a kid again, but also get to enjoy adult beverages and
literally,
fun games that honestly, are meant for adults.
One of the most fun times I've had in the city is just playing and and enjoying food and drinks and friends, and it's great to do things with your kids, but sometimes you just need that adult time, and
adults need that socialization and play as much as kids do.
We like to play too.
You gotta have it.
Yeah, definitely. What are the hours of operation? And please remind people again when this new exhibit will be coming in.
10 to 5 right now. We're closed on Tuesdays. This is through the school year. We expand those hours in the summer, open earlier, 9 to 6. Check the website when we adjust those hours. The weekends, we open those hours a little bit as well. And then we're only closed for 3 holidays of the year. So pretty much any day of the year you can come over to the DoSeum and have some fun.
Awesome. Okay. And then the new exhibit will be opening February?
February, that's right. I believe to 28th. Originally we had the 25th, but I think we're looking at the 28th now. So end of February, and then it'll be open throughout the spring semester.
Awesome. Awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of mention that maybe we didn't?
Just excited to be able to reopen this exhibit again. Hope to see a lot of families come. Hope to see a lot of schools engage. We're honored that we've received the grants to elevate it, and now at the counting down the days until the doors open and welcome people back into it.
Yeah, I cannot wait.
Thank you.
I will definitely be hopefully one of the first people to go.
Awesome.
And take my kids, all of them, all 85 of them. It
Love
seems.
that.
So yeah,
That's great.
but also tell them to tell their friends,
Yeah.
And their families, because it is a very, very, very important topic. Right. That not just for adults, but for kids to start having these conversations.
That's it, exactly. And I'll say one last thing about National Conversation on Race. NCOR, you can check their website, and there's still a few things going on here in the city with some of the other partner organizations.
Definitely. That people in the community can be a part of?
Correct.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was very nice to meet you guys.
Nice to
Make
meet
sure that
you.
you visit the DoSeum, follow them, follow all of their events, make sure that you attend. And support these exhibits and these designers and these people that put in a ton of time and effort and work into making sure that you guys have a good time and your children have a good time. So thank you again. I appreciate it. Thank you to VAPA Media and to Latina Podcast Network. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.